Hi, welcome to another video. In this video, I'll be showing how I have been hand quilting this quilt as a total beginner. This is my first time trying hand quilting, so I'll be showing you how I do it and the tools that I use and what I've been learning throughout the whole process. This is the Flowered Checks quilt by Sarah B. Sews, and I've just been kind of doing a simple quilt pattern throughout. Here's where I did some diagonal lines towards the center star, and then I did some outlining around these triangles, and then all around the edges I have been doing some straight lines, sort of cutting these squares in half and then going across these bigger blue squares, following the same pattern. So pretty simple. I just wanted to try doing something fairly simple for my first time hand quilting. And I will link all the supplies that I'm talking about. I'll link it in the description, as well as this fabric that I'm using. The needle I have been using is these Big Eye quilting needles. And I sort of got these on accident. I got them not knowing how tiny they would be, but I have been liking them, and I keep them in this little needle book that I made. But I have been liking them despite how small they are. So this is, yeah, that's how tiny they are. But they're supposed to make nice small hand quilted stitches like that. My stitching has been kind of all over the place. I have some sections where the stitches ended up really long, like here, and then short. So I think this is something that will just kind of come with practice, is your stitches will become more even and consistent. I've also tried, I'll just stick this in here for now. These ones these are embroidery needles, and they come in all different sizes. And I think if you were going to be using like thicker thread, you would use one of these bigger ones. Some people like to quilt with, you know, like a thicker quilting thread or embroidery thread. And so that's when these would be helpful. And I have tried these, and I do like them, but I think I've just gotten really used to these tiny quilting needles. And the thread I have been using is this Coats & Clark hand quilting thread. It's, I think, yeah, it's a poly cotton. I kind of like how it's a little bit grippy, but it also glides through the fabric nicely, and it's thin, but not too thin. So I've been liking this. And then a thimble. I have been using this Clover leather thimble, which I really like the feel of leather thimbles and how it just kind of grips to my finger. This is a size small. So I've been liking this. And then I just have some tiny scissors to snip my thread, and a Hera marker. This isn't technically a Hera marker, it's just a handmade like butter knife thing, but it works the same way, and I'll show you how I do that, how I mark my lines before quilting. So to mark your fabric, and there's other ways you can do this. You could use like a washable marker and draw some lines, and I guess depending on how complicated your pattern is, you might want to mark it with a washable marker or a pen, but just for doing these straight lines, I've been finding that I like this the best, or it's been working the best for me. So I will just simply, and also I could use a ruler, but I have just been kind of eyeballing it, especially on these short sections, but I will just press down to get this crease, and it's just enough that I can follow it. So to get started, you will first thread your needle. So I'll usually do about an arm's length worth of thread. Maybe a little bit longer if I'm trying to go a longer distance. And I'll show you how to do a quilter's knot at the end here. So take this is the end of the thread. And I guess depending on if you're left-handed or right-handed, you might need to do this in reverse. But with the end of the thread in your left hand, put it under the needle like this and hold it there with just a little tail right there. And then I'm going to wrap the thread around the needle. Usually, that was 2, 3, 4, usually about 4 times. If your thread is thicker, you may need to do it less. And then hold on to it. Once you've wrapped it around, hold on to the thread like this, and then not too tightly because you're going to push the needle through like this while holding on to the part you just wrapped, and bring it down to the end of your thread, and give it a little tug and you'll have a little knot. And I will usually cut off this little bit right there. And this kind of comes with practice, knowing how big to make the knot. If it's too big, you'll have trouble popping it through. If it's too small, then it'll just come right out. And it doesn't really matter, where you start, because you're going to be hiding the knot in between your top. You're going to be hiding your knot in the layers. So you're not going to be going through to the back. You're just going to be going in between the top layer and into the batting layer in here. So this is where I need to go, right here. So I'm going to put my needle in, just a little bit of ways, and put the needle in where I'm about to start. Oops. So like right about there. And then pull it through. And then to pop the knot, you just kind of give a tug while holding hold the fabric tight over here and pull. And then I kind of rub it in a little bit. And that's how you do it. And that, kind of takes some practice to get it popped in. That one went in pretty easily. Sometimes it doesn't go in that easily. And you kind of have to give a pretty good tug. And then usually I'll be sitting with the quilt on my lap, kind of how I'm doing right now. This is my knee right here. I kind of like to, depending on how I'm sitting. Right now I'm just sitting on the floor for this video, but if I'm sitting in a chair, or just depending on how I'm sitting, I will sometimes put my knee up to kind of drape the fabric over. I can make it tent a little bit so I don't have a bunch of fabric underneath, or I don't want the rest of the quilt bulking up underneath. And then I stick my left hand underneath, and I'm going to be, it's usually with these 2 fingers where I'm guiding the needle along. And actually I've thought about getting a thimble for this finger because I have stabbed myself a couple times. So I may need to do that. So with my left hand underneath, I will usually, take my pinky from this hand, from my right hand, and make sort of a tight surface like this, and go into my left hand like an oven mitt, as if I have an oven mitt on. And then I hold the fabric tight like this, like that. And this takes, it kind of takes some getting used to. When I first started, it felt like it was going to take me forever. But as I kept, going and practicing, it has been moving, or it seems like it's been moving faster. So I'm holding it here, this is kind of tight, or you know, I want this fabric not hanging loose, or this, you know, not this part of the quilt hanging loose. And you will kind of do like a rocking motion with your needle, and I'll just show you how that looks. So you go in, and then I have my other hand underneath feeling where the needle is, and I use it to kind of help push the needle back through like that, back down, move my finger out of the way, and then sort of guide it back up. And I pushed the end of the needle with the thimble, and this is where this comes in handy, because your finger will be sore if you try to push the eye of the needle over and over again. So, you know, that wasn't the most even of stitches, but that's okay. And then you just repeat it. That's all this really is like that rocking motion. I try to get, I guess I usually get about, you know, 2 stitches worth with this short needle. If you had a longer needle, you could kind of load up more stitches. And push it through like that. And sometimes you can also, you know, get a few stitches, pull through like this, but don't pull all the way through, and keep going for like a second round, and then pull it through, and you can kind of go a little quicker that way. I've been doing that, and I kind of like that. And my line, I could have made this a little deeper there. So you kind of have to readjust every so often. So I'm doing this little square, and I will just, you know, plant my pinky into my other hand to get this fabric tight. And I just keep going. My finger's a little slippery right now. I've noticed that the more I keep, you know, the longer I'm doing this in one sitting, I find that my stitches start to get a little more even. You know, they kind of start out longer, and then as I go, I kind of feel the rhythm, and they start to look a little smaller. Like these ones are looking a little bit better than they were at the beginning. So I just keep going to the end. This is where I'm going to be stopping, and so then I'll show you how to do a knot down here. Okay, so once you get to where you're going to stop, you have to time it a little bit if you want to end at a certain spot. So we'll just kind of go up, I just eyeball it about, I might shorten my stitches a little bit, or just do like, let's see, let's do that. Yeah, I kind of got my stitches really short. So the way that I have been knotting it is I hold the tail, the thread out here, loop my needle in through here, you know, as if I'm tying a knot, and I'll just go about a stitch length away. I'll make that first knot about a stitch length away. Kind of stop it. You can see that little knot. About a stitch length or a little more to kind of give the thread some room to pop through. And then I'll do it again. I usually do it 3 times, and I will use my fingernail to kind of hold to make sure the knot stops on top of the other knot, and then a 3rd time. And then again, you will go in just in that the top layer, and I kind of will like wiggle it around in the batting and come out. And you're going to pop the knot again. There. Oh, that was a good one. Kind of wiggle it in there, and then you'll cut your thread. And this isn't really enough to start a new section, so I probably won't keep that. And that is how you hand quilt. Yeah, that's basically it. I will show you how, sometimes you'll be going along and you'll need to stop and put new thread in kind of halfway through. And you'll do the same thing. You'll tie off and pop it through. But I'll just show you how I do that if I was stopping in the middle of like a longer section. So I'm just gonna, I just have about this much thread left, and I'm just gonna keep going. And another thing I should mention is that you don't want to pull your stitches too tight. You don't want to like bunch them or gather them. So just make sure you're not like tugging too hard after you've made your stitches. It just starts to get a little awkward when you have this short thread. So I might just end it soon. And again, I'm using my hand underneath to sort of help guide the needle through. I think I'm going to make it to this seam line right here and then stop. Okay. I try to kind of stop before a seam line, but I don't always end up. And for whatever reason, I like to take my thimble off before I tie a knot. Get this up close so you can see. So I usually, try to aim to put my knot about a little over a stitch length away, close to where I just came out. So I wrap my needle around and pinch right here where I want the knot to go. And then once I have my knot, the thread will kind of naturally want to go. And I can use my fingernail sometimes I usually do it 3 times. That seems to be enough with this thread width. And there's my little knot. And you want to go in the same direction that you're going, obviously, so you don't get a crooked stitch. And I sort of wiggle it in between the layers, sort of in the batting. It doesn't really matter where you come out, but I don't usually get a good pop. Oh, that was pretty good. Sometimes I don't get a good pop when I'm ending. Cut your thread. And I'm near the end, but I'm just gonna get along an arm's length. I usually do an arm's length and then like a little bit more. So I use a pretty long stretch of thread. That's just what I like. I don't like having to rethread so many times. Okay, do your quilter's knot. And I'll show it again, just so you can see it again. End your thread. This is my right hand, so since I'm right-handed, and kind of pinch it right there. And then wrap the long end of the thread around. I kind of lost count, but that might be like 5 or 6 times. And grab it, hold that, part that you just wound up. You don't want to wrap too tight because you still need to be able to glide it down. And then glide it down all the way down to the bottom. And there's your little knot. So then you keep going but come in, you know, since you're going to be popping your knot. Whoops. So go just between the layers and come up right where you want to start. Of course, I can't find it. In line with where you just stopped. You know, so you're making a straight line. Give a tug. I usually kind of rub it in there. And then you just keep going till you reach the end. And one thing I kind of had a question about, if anybody knows the answer or if this is just how it is with hand quilting, but when I started that new section, where was I? Right here, it leaves like a pretty big gap on the back side. So I was just curious if there was a way to get around that, or if that's just part of hand quilting. You're just going to end up with these gaps where you've had to restart. So if anybody knows or likes to make it so the back doesn't have those big gaps, I would be curious. And if you have any other tips that you'd like to leave in the comments for a first time, you know, beginner hand quilter. I feel like I am getting the hang of it, and as I go, and you can see that my stitches are getting smaller. This was, you know, compared to like this section right here. I know I did this, I know I went this way first, and my stitches are smaller than this section right here, but I'm sure, like, you know, over time you get better at making your stitches more even. And my back, I think I need to kind of work on getting my stitches kind of even, because they're a little bit all over the place. So, but I think that kind of adds to the handmadeness of it. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. And if you have, you know, any suggestions or anything that has worked for you, or any tools that you've enjoyed using, or needles or anything, I would love to hear about it in the comments. But yeah, I hope you will give it a try.